Lawyers, what case do you wish you never won? Story 1. I had a misdemeanor stalking case once. Client wanted a jury trial, so we did that, and I had to question the poor girl who was getting harassed by this guy. The jury came back with a not guilty verdict, and my client turned to me and said incredulously, "They've found me not guilty?" Yeah, that's the case. I used to do divorces, mostly. I'm not cut out for that work, but it's the job I could get out of law school. A guy came in for a divorce and seemed, by all accounts, really nice. He claimed that they had $50,000 in cash in their safe and that his wife had taken it out when she left the house. His ex-wife never worked, so it seemed reasonable she would take the money to help pay bills, start over, etc. 6 months in, though, when we were finalizing property, his true colors started to show, refusing to let her have the toaster, arguing over giving her anything even though she hadn't worked their entire 15-year marriage, telling her she could have half of the expensive plants she tended to only if she came and got them herself, without help. For reference, these plants were in a greenhouse, and some weighed upwards of 100 pounds each. She probably weighed 100 pounds herself, extremely meek woman in her 60s. The other lawyer and I finally got everything settled, except the $50,000. My client says she took it. Ex-wife says she did initially, but then put it back, on the advice of her attorney. So we go to trial just on this $50K. I cross-examine her elderly parents, treat them as hostile, really go all out, up against a veteran attorney who had been doing this for 30-plus years while I was brand new. I had to show my worth. In the end, the judge ended up declaring that the $50K was lost money. No one technically wins. 1 hour later, my client waltzes into the office and pays his $15K bill, all in $100 bills. I just stared silently at the money, while he smiled widely at me, thanked me for helping him, and then left. I quit practicing law entirely 3 months later. I still think about his ex-wife, who honestly seemed sweet and lovely, and hope she's okay. Story 2. I was representing a homeless dude who the government was trying to get custody over so they could force him into rehab. It was a bit rare in that the government rarely bothers to do the high expenses. You have medical reviews, the fact it has to go before a judge, and the defendant must be provided with a lawyer, and the low odds of success, since no one likes the idea of forcibly institutionalizing anybody. In this case, the guy was jacking off outside windows and stealing packages. The former, more so than the latter, had gotten a critical mass of neighbors to push the city to actually try for custody. Pretty easy win due to the very high bar to actually get someone for more than a short-term mental health hold. In all honesty, I felt like the city wasn't trying that hard. So much as going through the motions so they could tell the voters we tried. Did not feel great looking at all the folks who had packed into the courtroom as they realized the guy was not going to be forced into rehab and would instead be right back outside their window. But it got worse. The homeless guy went on to prevail in a civil suit for damages against the guy who beat his butt that I was not a part of, used the money to buy drugs, and was killed while wandering around a freeway ramp high as frick. Long story short, if I had lost, in the following 6 months, one guy wouldn't have to take a plea deal on a beating, 2 poor dudes who were coming home late from a landscaping job wouldn't have had to deal with the trauma of running over a guy, and the homeless guy would have been getting clean, as opposed to getting introduced to the bumper of a medium-duty pickup doing about 55 miles per hour late one night. Also very annoyed the DA never just ran the guy on indecent exposure issues, put him up on that, and then offered him a plea deal where if he does inpatient rehab, no jail. The whole approach by various city officials just reeked of, don't really want to win, but can't appear like we aren't doing anything because the primary is in 8 months. Story 3. Was a labor lawyer for some time, and we had a no-exception policy against using the company credit card for personal expenses. Everyone knows you get fired for it because they beat it into you with frequent training, make you sign stuff, etc. We fired a guy who was a few months from retirement, and his union filed for arbitration. Arbitration is kind of a joke, and any labor lawyer will tell you that no arbitrator would uphold that termination even if the guy wasn't near retirement. We won. Due to the way the pension worked, the fact he left before he reached 55 led to a massive pension discount, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh, by the way, his offense was filling up his car with gas using company card because he had left his personal card somewhere and was going to run out of gas. On the other side of the coin, I had many employees do insane things, like hide and sleep at work for 40 hours, leading to a 30,000-gallon gasoline spill, fighting, death threats, etc., who all got their jobs back through arbitration. Story 4. An undocumented immigrant had been hired by a farm, and then the farm refused to pay. When he demanded his payment, the farmer turned him in to be deported. Since it was the second time that the farmer had turned the guy in, it was unauthorized reentry, a felony. The prosecutors really didn't want to go after the guy. Really bad press. However, there was an ICE agent waiting right outside the courthouse. We thought that maybe if the guy does a couple months jail time, ICE forgets about him once he's let out, and in the meantime, we could go after the farmer to get payment. Ultimately, we decided that we were criminal defense attorneys, not immigration lawyers or business lawyers, and we couldn't ethically allow a guy to go to jail if we could get him out of it. We filed a motion to dismiss on procedural grounds. The prosecution didn't oppose, and the guy was promptly rounded up by ICE, deported, never got his money, and could never come back to the U.S. again. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 5. Right before taking my bar exam in Germany, I was working in a small law firm as a law apprentice. There was one case which was given to me because it was considered unwinnable, but the client insisted on pushing through. The case was about an elderly lady who sold her cat because she was too sick to take care of her. The buyer of the cat, our client, a rather wealthy lady, took the cat to the vet right after buying it. Apparently, the cat needed 2,000 euros worth of surgeries. She hired us to collect those 2,000 euros from the old lady. She was really an unpleasant woman, to say the least. She acted without even the slightest bit of remorse or empathy. She knew exactly in what situation the old lady was, because she was the one who informed us about it. Nevertheless, we won the case pretty quickly, even though our client didn't have a leg to stand on. Story 6. We took a copyright case to trial twice, and then an appeal, and won every time. The case was on contingency. The client doesn't pay unless you win. We have spent years trying to collect the judgment from the defendant so we can get paid. We have a judgment for our own fees that is close to $1 million, throwing good money after bad. The defendant hid his assets very effectively, put all hard assets into LLCs, got paid hundreds of thousands a year in cash and services to avoid banks. He died of COVID on Friday and was likely savvy enough to avoid probate. All of this is a gross oversimplification, but the too long didn't read is we won a case 3 times and have never been paid a cent because the loser was very shady and died, so we will likely get nothing for the client or ourselves. Story 7. Client hired IT consultants from another consulting firm. The firm basically found qualified people and rented them out, sort of like a recruiter, but they get fees forever, common in IT consulting. Client eventually thought he was paying too much, even though he agreed to it, and stopped paying. He owed $200,000. In New Jersey, you need to be licensed as a consulting firm. If you're not, you can't sue for your unpaid bills. They sued anyway and tried to argue some loopholes. We won. The client paid nothing beyond my legal fees. Was I happy I won? Meh. Gave me a great story, great for my reputation. Doesn't feel great helping out a D-bag, though. I'm an underling who had no role in being able to reject the case, so that was a little bit of a consolation at least. Story 8. Not a lawyer, but when I was a paralegal, my boss got an offender acquitted of the most serious charge of first-degree assault. We had a confession he'd given to our firm's hired shrink locked in my boss's desk drawer. During the trial, the lawyer had me, at the time a woman in my 20s, sit directly beside the perv so the jury could see I wasn't afraid of him. He insisted on taking the stand. During his testimony, I casually turned around to look at his wife. On her face was etched a look of horror. She, who knew him the best, could tell he was lying. Up to that point, I guess she'd believed his story, that the teenaged employee was just after his money. I felt so gross after that, and switched to a real estate and refinance law firm. Story 9. I always thought it would be cool to be a lawyer, until I had to pay $63,000 in attorney fees over the course of 2 years for custody of my daughter. Now I'm not complaining so much about the money, more so about watching her attorney try to turn a turd into a piece of gold, no matter how irrefutable the evidence against her was. I wouldn't be able to live with myself or sleep at night defending on cases like that, where I would potentially be trying to return children to drugs, abuse, and neglect. Story 10. I used to prosecute neglect cases in big cities in America for Child Protection Services. After a few high-profile cases where young kids ended up unalive at the hands of family members, CPS started asking us to file on pretty much everybody. I understand why, but I wish they would have stood up to the bad press instead of allowing it to dictate who they brought to court. From that point on, I would say about half my cases, even though a cause of action existed, I felt guilty for winning. Story 11. Worked for a large law firm. We won freedom for a suspected terrorist who probably did commit a very serious atrocity, but politics got in the way of convicting him. Sorry, cannot say which case this was. I've been living by the adage that politics poisons everything since the late 90s, and honestly, it's held completely true over the last 20 years and likely since well before them. Story 12. I represented a man accused of red rum. I was able to get him off on a technicality during his arrest, but it was pretty clear he was guilty of the red rum. I truly regret getting him off because he was most definitely guilty. You followed the law. The arresting cops made a mistake. They failed the due process. It sucks, but you did your job correctly. Even if you have to free a guilty man, if you did it by the books, you are a good lawyer. Story 13. Lifelong public defender here. None. I will also say that my feelings for a client are rarely impacted by what they're accused of having done. I've had accused red rummers who I enjoyed working with. I've had accused shoplifters who I wanted to strangle. Story 14. The one thing this post is teaching me is that I could never be a lawyer because I have a conscience. And I mean no offense to this, I'm sorry that you folks have to live with these things. I know I'm not mentally strong enough. Story 15. Seeing lots of armchair lawyers in here, but I can tell you the cases we often wish we lost, the ones where clients don't pay their darn bills. Actually getting paid is one of the most stressful parts of practicing. Lawyers do seem to often be tasked with defending clients who have been accused of heinous crimes, leading to situations where they might feel regret or moral conflict. Despite this, though, they are bound to the law of the attorney rulebook to represent their clients to the best of their abilities, even if they believe their clients might be guilty. I can totally see how some lawyers might feel as if they're complicit in delivering injustice, and they might struggle with their conscience as a result. Although it's important to know that not all lawyers engage in this type of work solely for financial gain. Many are driven by a sense of justice and the desire to ensure that every defendant receives a fair trial, regardless of their alleged crimes. Additionally, the legal system is designed to ensure that everyone is entitled to representation. And without lawyers willing to take on unpopular or difficult cases, the justice system would not function properly. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.